Hello, welcome to Philosophy All Along. So, I'm really excited to get to talk with you today about Wicked. I just saw the film, I had a great time. I've actually never seen the musical, so no spoilers for me how it ends. I have, however, read the novel, and I am pretty sure that at the end of it, Elphaba dies. But other than that, um, I'm excited to see kind of how they do it differently from the novel and what happens. Now, the film, I think, has done something very smart and very subversive. And that's what I want to talk with you about today. So, I think this film is making a statement about education, specifically education in the United States, and is addressing a kind of uh, takeover of education by virtue of eliminating freedom of speech. That this film is kind of acting as a um, anthem of teachers and education about educational freedom, educational attainment, the right of equity and diversity within education, the idea that education is supposed to meet the best interests of the entire population, but more importantly, the students which it serves. And I think it's a very strong indictment of the interference of politicians in the educational system as a means by which to achieve greater power for themselves. In other words, to make a long story short, I think that this whole film is really saying, okay, what is happening right now in education as we slowly move to greater standardization, greater exclusion, um, greater censorship, and taking away teacher power, autonomy, taking away the idea that at the end of the day, the best people to make the decisions about education are probably educators. And I think it's a very strong indictment of that tendency and direction that we've taken here in the United States. So, what's my evidence? So, number one, obviously, so much of this particular film takes place at a school. And we do know that there's this problem that's going on. And so, spoilers ahead for anyone who has not seen the film yet. So, we know that there's this problem of silencing animals, right? So these are not just sentient animals, but intelligent, self-aware, able to communicate through language. So there was a point in time in Oz where human beings and non-human animals fully interacted, right? That they engaged in a full free relationship with each other in a political and civil way. And so we know that there were teachers and students at the school in the past who were animals. Now, we know that this has been changing, that they've been looking at caging them, silencing them, that they're taking away their rights and their freedoms. And so, what's the connection here? Well, number one, if you look at Dr. Dillerman, with whom I feel a great deal of connection, you have someone who's trying to teach history. And that speaks immediately to me about the fact that we are increasingly censoring history here in the United States. We're more than happy to go into classrooms and remove textbooks, censor those textbooks, remove books from classroom if they have if there's any mention not just of sexuality but any mention of being gay, right? We're happy to go and eliminate as much as we can, but not just in terms of, and for some of you might be like, well, why would there be books that have like gay people or a gay agenda in it? Even if I left that aside, we're going in and trying to eliminate things like conversations about slavery in textbooks. The last time I saw an analysis of a textbook, even before these moves to supposedly remove this anti-white sentiment, the the analysis showed that the conversation of slavery was about 2 pages, that there was absolutely no mention of murder in that section on slavery, except for one time where it said occasionally slaves would get so angry that they would murder their masters, which is totally backwards because slave owners with regularity were maiming, raping, and murdering slaves. So, this is all to say that there's an actual truth about the United States, both good and bad, that by knowing it, we are able to improve and grow, kind of recognize the things that we didn't do well, and then improve upon those things and try and make sure that we don't go back to them. There's a reason why in Germany they really teach the Holocaust. They're very conscious of it. It's in order to prevent it from happening again. We seem more reticent to do it, that if we teach our own history, like, oh, well, that's some sort of anti American. From my perspective, and I think from Dr. Dillerman's perspective, how is one supposed to celebrate one's achievements if one doesn't recognize what one has ever overcome? We would have to see all the things that we did poorly or bad or that were immoral in order to be able to go, oh, look, we have changed that. Otherwise, you've just always been great and always been perfect, but it doesn't really mean anything because you don't have a comparison. Oh, what did we come from? What did we change? What did we improve? So Dillerman's trying to teach history, and he's trying to teach, from his perspective, the truth about history. And the goal is to eliminate him and to silence him. So that seems to already speak very clearly to this shift in the US educational system towards the idea that we should be silencing people. And specifically, we should be silencing teachers. So, what's the point? My grandparents escaped from Cuba as it was becoming a dictatorship under Fidel Castro. And my grandmother always pointed out that Castro, as he came in, was telling everyone that this was a populist revolution, that it was going to be about the people and giving greater power to the people. But in reality, when he got there, he took total control. And the first thing that he did in order to accomplish this, according to my grandmother, was eliminate all the textbooks, specifically the history textbooks. That the goal here was to create a history according to Fidel Castro and basically from Fidel Castro on. And that's exactly what we see happening here in the United States. A rewriting of the textbooks, removing of history, removing of people who are willing to challenge the system or speak to ideas that the system finds challenging. That's exactly what Oz is doing, right? The Wizard of Oz himself is specifically finding a common enemy. What's the best way to bring people together? Find a common enemy. But the problem is to create that common enemy, you have to have people who do not know enough about the enemy to challenge it, that they have to kind of go along and say, okay, yes, this seems like it makes sense. That you basically what you do is you create a populace that doesn't question this idea of animals being locked in cages. And you do this kind of slowly but surely over time, rewriting people's education, but also bringing in new generations who never even think to question it. How else do you explain something like slavery? You have all of these people who just never even thought to question it. So they just kind of go along like automatons with it. And then the goal is you create the animals, in this case, as a kind of working class that themselves don't need that education, like Rockefeller was pointing out. They don't need all that much, right? What is the cage other than a means by which to make sure that they don't learn to read, write, and speak? And so I see a direct parallel to the idea that as we're shifting our educational system to meeting instead the needs of corporate empires, this idea of for-profit education, parent choice, which is all really just about, well, let's narrow the scope of education so that the only people who are really getting these robust liberal art educations, these educations that are about like learning all of these tools for business and how to challenge business and in logic and law, that the people who are only learning that are the people who can afford to go to the very expensive privatized schools. But the public education, as it's reduced down to in school choice, is really just a space where what you do is you teach a bunch of workers who have been kept in an intellectual cage, because what their teachers don't do is teach them challenging ideas. They don't teach them to challenge things. The goal of education in a robust educational system is not to get the students to believe what you're saying, but to give the students the tools by which to verify if what you're saying is in fact true or false. Now, there's further evidence that this is what the film is about and addressing. There's a couple of songs. So let's talk about those songs and the song lyrics involved there. Okay, so here's one. In Dancing Through Life, we are told, the trouble with school is they always try to teach the wrong lesson. Believe me, I've been kicked out of enough of them to know. They want you to become less callow, less shallow, but I say, why invite stress in? Stop studying strife and learn to live the unexamined life. And so this is, of course, as you probably already know, a direct reference to the famous quote by Socrates that the unexamined life is not worth living. So this entire song is a rejection of that notion, right? This entire song is a rejection of the idea that life becomes valuable and moving and powerful and important when we examine it. It's not about what you do or what you accomplish out in the world. It's not about your productivity. It's about your own ability to come to a recognition of who you are and kind of your own purpose and to develop that purpose for yourself. Well, here, this entire song is like, why would you worry about that? School's missing the point. And to me, this speaks to many, many, many people out there who are saying, why are you wasting your time with things in school like the arts and the humanities and philosophy and psychology? Like, the only people who need to do that are the few people that you like want to be entertainers, or the few doctors and so on and so forth. What you really need are people who can work and people who can be productive. Like, get them out there with like the basic language arts, get them out there with the basic math, make sure that they have a basic idea of like how to use money, and maybe how they understand mortgages. Like, make sure that they can engage in the basic citizenry. But we don't need all of this other stuff, right? And so the song is pointing towards, I think, our own social rejection of the idea that part of the point of education is to come to understand who you are. That educators, their goal isn't to teach you who you are, but is to help you to engage in examination, for you to reflect on that. We as a society generally don't like that. We don't like to send our children to school and have those children coming back questioning themselves, or, oh, heaven forbid, questioning their gender identity, or questioning our politics, or questioning their religion, or questioning their society, or questioning their country. We want them to go in and learn the things that they need to do to be good, productive citizens. And interestingly enough, Fiero's song, when he's singing this, and I think without entirely realizing, is actually advocating for that kind of idea, that education really should only be about, getting people through with just enough so that they can skate by. And it reminds me of another quote that really concerns me. So what a lot of people don't know is that public education wasn't actually started by people who were like, you know what, I think that what we need is everyone to understand themselves and the world, and be able to participate deeply in civic life, and be able to be the happiest, most fulfilled people they can be. That education was actually first in the public sphere, in terms of public education, here in the United States, was actually heavily pushed by companies, basically by uh, like factory owners, right? People who were concerned that as people were moving from the rural world and finding work in this factory world, in this new industrial life as the United States was developing, that they didn't have the basic skill sets that they needed to be able to engage in that kind of work in the factory, that they knew what they needed to do to be able to be farmers and ranchers, but that they didn't have the skill sets that they wanted for them to be able to work in the factory. And so people like John D. Rockefeller and other like business tycoons and people who engaged in a whole lot of awful and shady and monopolistic shady business practices, um, really pushed the US government to try to develop this public education system. And one of the people who helped Rockefeller in doing it, Frederick T. Gates, to quote, he was the co-founder of the General Education Board in 1903, said the following. He said, "We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or of science. We are not to raise up among them authors, orators, poets, or men of letters." Rockefeller himself, we are told, said, "I don't want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers." And that tracks. That tracks perfectly with our educational system. It tracks with the idea that the whole purpose of public education was never to produce people who could think deeply or challenge the system or challenge the power of the very, very wealthy. But it was really about being able to get these workers out there who could meet the jobs that the government and that the powerful and that the wealthy and that the corporations wanted of them to do. And that speaks, I think, continually, even now, to the problem of, if you look at standardized tests, we have, and this isn't just a recent problem, we have in my lifetime moved increasingly towards the idea that the purpose of education is very, very, very narrow. It's not about enrichment. It's not about finding happiness or joy. It's not about self-reflection. It's not about understanding who you are. But we're going to tell the children that's what it's about. It's about you being able to be a happy and fulfilled person. Your education is about you. But if you actually look at standardized tests, what you come to realize is that the only things that students really have to 100% come out knowing for sure is mathematics and English, maybe a little bit of science, maybe a little bit of history, but really to be able to get that high school diploma, the only stuff that we really make sure 100% that you definitely know are those two subjects. Those subjects are very useful, very important, very powerful, but notice we're not encouraging people to learn those subjects in terms of being able to understand the nature of the universe or reflect on themselves. We're teaching them to understand them in the most basic ways so that they can go out there and work. Let's produce these workers, preferably workers who aren't going to question the system by learning things like philosophy or critical race theory or feminist theory or queer theory or any of these other theories. Like, just get them out and make sure that they can work. So the concern very quickly becomes that we're telling all of these young people that the reason why they're doing this is for them and for their well-being, but it's really not. And as I've noted before, that if education was really principally about their welfare, about children's well-being and their welfare, that it would actually, the number one thing we'd make sure that everyone came out knowing would be health and personal fitness, right? That we'd make sure that they understood how their bodies work, how to keep themselves healthy, how to eat well, all of those kinds of things. And then we'd probably make sure that they understood psychology, maybe some philosophy, and then everything, really, let's be honest, that being a flourishing, self-examining person requires learning as much as possible, and you never really ever stop. Okay, let's look at one more song to kind of tie a neat little bow on this. So Glinda sings in Popular, "When I see depressing creatures with unprepossessing features, I remind them on their own behalf to think of celebrated heads of state or specially great communicators. Did they have brains or knowledge? Don't make me laugh. They were popular. Please, it's all about popular. It's not about aptitude. It's the way you're viewed." And how brilliantly does that speak to and act as kind of a testament for the wizard himself, the Wizard of Oz? If you look at the character as how he's presented in Wicked, he doesn't actually have aptitude. He's not actually competent, right? He has managed to manipulate the way he's viewed. He's managed to create a brand such that people have been willing to put him in power. And so it makes sense that whatever Glinda's narrative arc is going to be, that at least for the moment, that as we get to the end of the film, that she seems more sympathetic to where Oz and Morrible are coming from, because from her perspective, he is doing the thing that she's always thought one needed to do to become accomplished. That it's never really been about being the real deal and really knowing these things. That if you want to get accomplished, it's about the way that people see you. And so again, it speaks to this larger problem of who needs aptitude. So it's an inversion of the usual indictment that we have of teachers, which is people who can't do, teach. Now we've turned it into you don't need to have to do to be important, to be a head of state, to be someone of value in society. You don't need to be able to do, you don't need the aptitude. You just need people to think that you can. And that's exactly who the Wizard of Oz is. So in the end, Wicked is a terrible indictment and a vision of the future that we are currently creating. What we can see by looking at the film and then looking at our own society is that we kind of willingly are going along with, okay, what I need is people to come in and kind of be my savior. I'm not super happy with the economy. I'm not super happy with the way life is going. And oh, look at all of these people who are kind of challenging the system. And what I really want is some powerful person to come in and institute the system for me. And I don't want my kids to have it worse than I did. And what's the best way to do that? Well, making sure that they can find their place in that society. Let's get some order, right? Let's get everything just kind of down that straight and narrow path and cut all divergent paths off of it. So the long and short of it is that the film indicts us, that it reminds us that education is really about seeing and seeing other people's experience more so than anything else. Yes, you learn a lot of facts and figures and things that are useful, but really it's about being able to see. What we see is that people like Fierro, and this is an important educational lesson, sometimes learn best by actually seeing events as opposed to maybe reading about them or being lectured. And the hope is that in his moment, that he goes from kind of hearing about the treatment of animals to seeing what happens. And as a result, he becomes a kind of revolutionary. He becomes an advocate for those who are losing their voice, because the educational system there is one that's being shifted from a system that's meant to give voice to one that's meant to take voice away. And I think we all should take a real close look at not just our schools and our government, but also ourselves and our own engagement with education and our children's education, and ask ourselves, are we encouraging our children to become people who have voice and encouraging them to help others have voice? Or are we encouraging a system that silences some people so that others can have it better? If you enjoyed this video, please take the time to like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. Please comment if you have another thought on something. If you didn't like it, you think there's an error in it, by all means comment. Let's have a dialogue about it. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. Have a wonderful day.